Hello and welcome to Apropos, a conversation between Clojure programmers that you can join in live on YouTube. We're going to discuss a few Clojure news items and share our opinions on them. Then we'll jump into a REPL and code some exercises or do some demos. If you're joining us live, feel free to comment in the chat and we'll try to address the questions. So I'm going to introduce the panel. Today we have Mia.
I think you're on mute, actually, Mia.
Oh, Mia's muted.
Oh, yeah, I am muted. Sorry, I'm trying to tweet another link so people watch us.
Okay. We got Mike.
Hello.
And we have that other guy, Ray.
Yeah, but whatever you're called.
and I am Eric. How are you, Clojure people from all over the world?
International.
All right, so we do have a new thing. It's relatively new. The show notes are in the YouTube description. It's a gist, so it's got links. It's got all the topics we plan on talking about, and links to the articles that we might mention, and then you can comment. So, if you don't like the way we do our REPL exercise, you can post in your version of it. So please check that out. Okay, let's get started. So what's first? That's a big news this week, huh? We had the Clojure script release. No, this is pretty big.
Have any of you tried it yet?
I tried it, and
did you like it?
I would have liked it if I hadn't had to throw it out straight away.
Dang! I hate it when that
What
happens.
happened? Why'd you have to throw it out?
It was one of these things where some library didn't like it, so it was like
And it didn't like that library, so they just said no.
And I just thought, I need to do something, so I'll just leave it. So
sometimes work gets in the way.
So I think maybe it's just one of those things where we have to wait a week or two before we can try it out. But it looks really interesting. I'm definitely very eager. I wanted to try it on the REPL, actually, the reptile stuff, because I wanted to have the nice error handling stuff that's introduced there.
Yeah. Do you think there's stuff for Datafy and Nav in your REPL?
Well, maybe. Yeah. It's possible, I suppose. I haven't really thought about it too much yet.
Yeah. Cool.
I mean, in theory, you could kind of re-implement Rebel, I suppose, and do that kind of stuff. But I think maybe it's stuff like where you have function names and some of the forms. Maybe you could use Nav to link to documentation or source code or something like that. That could be interesting.
I think
cool.
I think what's bigger to me than Datafy and Nav, those get a lot of attention for some reason. But I like them. I mean, it's just a couple of protocols, whatever. But I like the new exception stuff. That's my favorite stuff.
That's what I want to play with as well.
Yeah.
That's really the one I want to get to first. Yeah.
So just to clarify, the new exception stuff is they've been categorized, where the exception happened. So if it was in the compiler or at runtime, during macro expansion, there's all sorts of different. They sat down and figured out what are all the phases that the code is going to go through, and so that is part of the exception stuff now.
And also,
what else is in there?
It's like the way they're printed. They're not huge, long stack traces anymore. And you can do PST to see the gory details if you want. But the default behavior is just a nice short thing, and we all experience that, right? So
I'd love to see one.
Oh, just go type.
Go to a REPL.
Do F first of 1. Of course, you have a REPL running right now, right? Just start up a Clojure REPL, or if you don't have a Clojure script one, and just do like F first of one, and that's that's malformed.
Yeah, I don't know if I have Clojure script yet on this thing.
What I was going to say, by the way, Eric, while we're waiting for the REPL stuff, is the phasing stuff. When I get that, I think it's kind of like, I think it's interesting internally for them, but I don't think it's that interesting for users,
No.
I think it's more of a tooling thing. Like, well, where did the error occur? If you're really making the tools, it's kind of nice to know that level of information, especially for the macros, I guess. But I think for most users, they don't really give a toss where it actually went wrong. They just know it went wrong, and now I'm not getting a mile long of spec errors plus exception stack traces. I'm just getting a very small error that caused this problem. And the nice thing about it is, because it's got all the data in there, you can say precisely which line and all this kind of stuff without having to parse it manually. Those kind of things are really nice, I think.
I would imagine, like, if you're writing a macro or you're like in the weeds and you're like, what is causing this failure? Then the phase might help you. But that's pretty rare, right? When you're like, you just like, you don't even have a clue, and you're like, eh.
So the reason that I like this for two reasons. One is that I feel like it's actually kind of it's an insight into the design of Clojure that maybe even Rich Hickey didn't have, of like, what are all the phases of this, and having to go through and name them and give them. I think each one has a keyword now, so that you can know, you can identify the phase. That's cool. So, like, to me, that's like a nice little thing where the outside of the system, the interface, the error messages are now forcing you to get more clear about the inside.
And I think that this will really kind of demystify debugging macros, right? Like, when you're getting error messages that are thrown by macros, in the past, you have absolutely no idea where they're coming from, and it's a nightmare. So having that extra layer.
Before, if I'm not mistaken, before the sometimes it was inconsistent, but sometimes an error message contained that information. It said, oh, this is a compiler error, and then it had a colon in the string, and now that's all taken out, and that logic is put into the printer. So the error message printer knows to look at the phase and look at the string, and they're separated. So it's more consistent across the board.
Yeah, what I like about this, and I think we're kind of getting to it, is that it's something which will help people that are new to the language, but it's also something, if you're writing macros, you need to be quite an expert, that you'll also get a benefit. So this is a perfect case where they make an improvement and it helps everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're a kind of day one user who's just walking up to a new REPL for the very first time and you type in some shit and you get it wrong, you'll get a nice bit of help. Or if you're a really super deep expert and you want some help with where this macro expansion has gone wrong, which is good. That is a super improvement. And I think it needs to be clearer about exactly what, that kind of thing, saying it that way, in my opinion, wins a lot more friends,
Yeah, I think the other thing that's kind of related to that is it is also just an application of the same principles, right? It's just, let's pull these things apart that we had put together into a string and, turn it into data and just expose that. And that clarified everything. That was the answer that needed to happen. Like, it didn't violate principles. So, you could imagine someone proposing an error message improvement that was sort of against the Clojure principles, saying, oh, but it's good for beginners, right? And so then there would just be this big debate, and it wouldn't go anywhere, because it was two things are just not aligned. But this aligned it all. It aligned everything. And that I think that, like, to me, like I might not win any friends saying this, but the error messages are something that if you have committed to Clojure, there's something that you don't think about that much anymore. They are tough to get through, but everyone I've talked to is like, it's not a big deal. They're not great, but it's also not a big deal. I lost my train of thought there.
Well, let me disagree with you completely then.
Okay.
Because I think that they remained until maybe this release, they remained the top concern of the community. So I think even if you're like pretty good at Clojure, you get pretty pissed off. I mean, I still get pissed off with the error messages. I still get pissed off with the error messages in 1.10 as well, by the way, because there's still some stuff which is weird. This is definitely a huge improvement. So, I'm not saying, we haven't made great strides, because it was really shockingly bad, but now it's decent, which is good. But there are certainly some things which are still a bit weird. Like you still get these odd things that you get nth doesn't work, when really it's not an nth problem, it's some other problem that is causing an nth.
Right. No, there's definitely
there's all kinds of strange things going on. There is more stuff to be fixed, let's say.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think the error messages are that great. I have a whole blog post about this, about how they're almost just accidental, right? They're not even designed. That's just what happens when you do that. And there's no attempt to make it understandable. So yeah, I think that another effort would be to go through and say, instead of just falling through to returning nil because we just didn't have an else case in our cond, let's put in a throw right there that actually tells you where you are and where the problem was. Stuff like that would be the next big improvement, I think.
Fill in the potholes, yeah. But
and also there's kind of this false dichotomy about oh, sorry, yeah, my internet's awful in here. This conference room's like a Faraday cage. There's kind of this false dichotomy about who is it helping. One of the things that came out of that, we haven't gotten to the state of Clojure survey yet, but there are fewer beginners in the community than there used to be. And there's a lot more people who are using Clojure, there are a lot more people who have been using Clojure for a while, which makes it tough to source. And it's tough to source Clojure people. It's tough to source junior Clojure devs for when you need a junior dev. Once you've got one, or someone who's even willing to learn Clojure, wants to learn Clojure, you have to train them. And there's a huge appetite for being able to train people effectively and quickly. And so ergonomic improvements in the language, while they may not feel like a big net benefit for individual expert users of Clojure, for expert users of Clojure who are working to onboard people to become expert users of Clojure, they're a big win. I think that one of the reasons that they score so high in the community concerns is because we're trying to teach new people how to use this so they can do their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, they were hostile. I don't think there's any worth, you can't beat around the bush there. I mean, they were literally hostile in the past.
Right,
so, so we've moved beyond hostile, which is good. That's definitely good.
And the corollary to what I was saying is that you have to already be committed to Clojure to get through the error messages, right? And that's a big problem. Someone who tries it and they type something wrong, some typo at the REPL, and now they're faced with a message that they'll never get through, they're going to stop. They're going to quit. If they're not committed to Clojure, if they're just trying it out, when they could be really into Clojure if they could get past that. So I think error messages are an important thing.
Can I put another tangent on this to bring Mike back in? Because I think the way that exceptions are handled in ClojureScript, because really it's the ClojureScript announcement, because 1.10 has been out for a little while, but is the handling of exceptions in ClojureScript a little bit different, Mike, because you have to deal with different browsers and different runtimes. How is that varied?
So there still are phases, right? I think. So I ported a lot of this stuff, and I remember it was a little bit tricky to deal with like runtime phases versus compile time phases. But I think I remember it all kind of worked out. I remember getting some things wrong at first, you know. I don't recall anything specific about different browsers coming into play. Maybe you're thinking about like, definitely if you do have an exception that occurs in a browser.
That's what I mean, yeah. When you actually get an exception.
Yeah, so like the stack traces are not standardized in browsers, I guess. So that comes into play if like you're trying to do source mapping to figure out where the error occurred. And that's always been the case. I don't think anything changed with respect to that.
Because with Clojure, it's just really mapping the information from stack traces and stuff like that, where and that's one place where there's a well-defined contract for the data, isn't it? Whereas with ClojureScript, it's not so. Yeah, so
this new feature in ClojureScript really was just all about putting in or adding phases where they were, they were needed everywhere, Just kind of making sure that every time something bad happens, the appropriate phase is associated with the data that's sent out. But like you said, like the lack of uniformity and the exception stack traces is still there. And that's the way that's handled is by having different stack trace parsers per browser, or per JavaScript environment, if you will. That's still a mess.
Yeah.
I noticed there's also a lot of performance improvements quite a few in the new release. What was the process for deciding to put those in?
That's like a scratch your own itch kind of thing. Like one day I was sitting there like, we don't have chunk seeks for ranges in ClojureScript. We got to have that, And it just, for some reason, sometimes I find something like that interesting, or whoever's working on something like that. Like that, there's certainly not like people voting on tickets saying, hey, I would like this, So to be honest, those things are all driven, I think.
Even the type inference stuff, is that just you like, scratching your own?
Yeah, no one's asking for that
desires.
Stuff, right?
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, because it's cool. Like it's it's always cool to see like the really great performance.
Well, that's what leads to cool things, right? If you're interested in it, you go and do it, right?
The nice thing about that one is that it's not something. It's something which is different between ClojureScript and Clojure. I mean, it's an implementation detail, but it's a very nice one, because you're using the information about that you can pretty much guarantee. Well, I think you probably can guarantee it. I don't know whether you're doing formal proofs there, but I guess you're pretty much sure that that this information is correct, so you can rely on it.
You mean for the type inference stuff? For
the type inference, yeah.
Yeah, it's not that complicated. There's no formal proofs.
That's what I mean. You probably know that it was gonna, it's a number. Okay, I know it's a number.
Yeah.
I can see it's an integer. JavaScript will tell me it's an integer, and I'm going to trust that, for example.
Yeah, those type inference things are pretty straightforward, I would say. I mean, it's complex because you're down in the compiler trying to figure out, how to do it in that context. But the ideas there are very straightforward.
And the improvements you've gotten in performance are pretty impressive.
Yeah, important. Those are always pretty cool, right? Like all it takes is like what you really want to do is you want to pull that off without breaking anything.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Because that's a broken change is no good at all. But I think a lot of that stuff was easy to do. Sorry, it was easy to do just because it had already been done in Clojure, right? It's a matter of porting some of that stuff over to Clojure.
So that was one of the questions I had is which of these things are already being done in Clojure and which ones are JavaScript specific?
The chunked seek stuff is definitely from Clojure. Like it has chunked seek stuff for ranges. So that it was a matter of taking probably stuff that Alex did and a bunch of other people contributed to making it happen in Clojure and looking at, how does it do it there? And then kind of just translating the ideas to ClojureScript. The other ones I think are ClojureScript or JavaScript specific. Yeah.
And, there's also things like, okay, so you're in the compiler all the time, so you can tell me this, but it seems like if you took a string and you called the function that said, "Is this a string?" Just return it. Like that wouldn't really bother the computer so much to slow it down. You know, like just a type check and then return. So it's like a function call, a type check, and a return. But maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe the JavaScript engines aren't that great at optimizing that stuff away.
Yeah, so I guess what you're speaking to is like some of these things are just like little micro performance enhancements that really don't matter.
Well, you said it's 3 times faster.
Yeah, some of these things are, yeah.
I think what you're getting at is that the JIT might deal with it rather than having to deal with it in the compiler even.
Yeah, it's certainly true that a lot of times when you make one of these performance improvements, you will see that the less mature JavaScript VMs benefit the most from the thing you did.
Yeah.
And what you're finding out is the other clever ones have already figured it out somehow. And they don't speed up.
Do you get like cascading effects where it's like, oh, now the code is so small it can be inlined, and then now that it's inlined, it's going to go through a JIT phase faster or something? Is there stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that does happen, especially with Google Clojure involved. And it can, like a small change can like have a greater change deep down because Clojure can now work with it, and So I do think that the cascading stuff kind of happens, and it amplifies the change that you make. It makes it even faster.
So every change you make is potentially bigger than it would have been before you made the other changes.
Like this, the sum is greater than whatever that phrase is.
Yeah. Over time, every little micro optimization you make can have more potential to cascade.
I think that's true. Yeah, actually.
Okay. So are we going to move on to the next one? I think we should.
Yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there's plenty to talk about this time. So there's the State of Clojure survey.
Maybe this will be a talky episode.
Might be.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any surprises. Did y'all find any surprises in the State of Clojure survey?
I was digging for some. Yeah, I wanted something meaty, something juicy.
Yeah.
Like Daniel Higginbotham's comparison of the comments that he dug through with the official comments released.
You mean Daniel Compton?
Oh yeah, Daniel Compton. Sorry. I know there's 2 Daniels. It's so hard. Oh, I thought that was there was a lot of contrast there between like the official read of the State of Clojure and sort of what was being said.
Yeah. Well, Alex Miller's summary was mostly of the quantitative data. Just saying like, oh, there's more people using it at their companies. There's fewer, like you said, there's more like old people instead of young people. Was
that the biggest news, the age distribution? Yeah.
To me, that was pretty big. I think it was a new question. Is that right?
Oh, okay.
It was something like, 25 plus, 21 to 25, and it was pretty skewed in that direction. And he compared it to another survey done of the whole JVM ecosystem, and we were significantly older. Older meaning more experienced as a community, which is pretty. I don't know. I checked in the mirror how many grays I had in my beard when I did that. Like I'm one of the oldies.
I don't know what you mean. It's not like this podcast is representative of the community in any way. I think we're slightly overrepresented with young women, actually.
25%,
yeah, 25%. We're doing pretty good.
It is true. Like the programming community is growing so quickly that most of the developers are young, right?
Right.
It's few.
Doubling every 5 years.
Every 5 years. Okay.
So that means that at any point in time, half of the people have less than 5 years of experience.
Yeah.
And we just don't see that in the Clojure community. It's not 50% under 5.
That's true. Yeah. It's a little.
Yeah.
I mean, it just means it's probably like Clojure is probably not someone's first language.
Yeah.
Or second or third or whatever.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, there's not as many jobs. You know, people aren't going to boot camps to learn Clojure.
Yeah, I think there's more. It's like a lot of things as well, isn't it? You know, time moves on. Rust comes out. You know, Reason comes out. Other languages start to appear at the bar. You know.
Yeah.
It is pretty unfortunate because you're kind of back to where you were maybe I feel like there was kind of like a swell in Clojure interest, and you've had people like picking it up, and the question from the bosses, like, oh, if we use Clojure, how will we hire for Clojure, became less of a concern. And it worries me that it's going to be a concern again. Like, it's going to be harder to talk bosses into using Clojure when it's usually the best tool for the job.
I've given up on even trying to convince people to use the language, to be honest. I'll move to a company that uses it instead of trying to convince my boss or the team.
I mean, yeah, but that's how you get companies that use it.
In my experience talking to companies, it's that they want someone experienced. They want like CTO level people for their Clojure companies, because they are either so small they need people who can they cannot afford training or something like that, so they just need someone to just jump in the code base and just start working. I mean, that is another thing, is we don't have companies that are hiring, you know, juniors, entry level.
That's completely untrue. I just came from one to another, so
okay.
It's completely untrue. The people, you know, Sarah Nova, it's defunct now, but for a while they had, you know, 50 plus Clojure devs, and they had an active training program.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, if you have work to do, you are going to be hiring less senior people. If you have a single project that's written in Clojure because a very senior person convinced someone else to write it in Clojure, then you're going to be hiring very senior people. But if you have a large, healthy organization, you're going to be hiring at all levels.
Right.
I
wish I could find these companies, though. Sure, they exist. I just can't find them. They should just email me, and then that'll solve it.
Yeah, like a company with 50 developers developing Clojure.
I know. Well, so I mean, that's an interesting story, right? Like, I was, you know, I make Clojure training material, and I went to the conch, and I was, you know, thinking, I was on the edge. I was thinking about whether I should expand outside of Clojure and like not focus so much on Clojure. And then I met someone from Sarah Nova. He had never heard of me. I'd never heard of him. He had a 50-person team up in Canada. And I was like, oh man, maybe there is more out there that, you know, that I haven't discovered yet, and they haven't discovered me. And so that's what helped me stay focused on Clojure.
That's
a couple of years ago now.
That's just weird, though, that there's like that large of a company that we haven't heard of.
I mean, I know the guys who like started we could actually get them on at some point, like who started the training system there. But part of it was they had like 3 or 4 Clojure devs, and they hired people straight out of college, some of them without computer science degrees, trained them in Clojure until they had 50 plus Clojure devs.
So maybe those developers just aren't that vocal, really. They just kind of do their job. Yeah.
But I think a lot of, you know, in fairness to a lot of developers, you know, that I speak to and that I know, most of them are just happy Clojure users, and they just get on with their work, you know.
Yeah.
And that's fine, of course, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't become a real issue until you are trying to find another Clojure job, or you are a Clojure company that's trying to hire.
Very true. Yeah.
Right.
And at that point, it becomes a really big issue.
So Mia, you seem to have read the Daniel Compton's analysis. I didn't get a chance to read it. What struck you in that one?
It's a lot of people who are very happy users of Clojure who are afraid that they won't be able to be very happy paid users of Clojure in the near future.
Okay.
Is sort of, I don't know, that's the overall tone, I think, of the comments that came out. I don't know if Mike, did you read it?
No, I'm just trying to think about what you said. Are they afraid because if they do happen to lose their job or if something goes wrong, it'll be hard to find another?
Yeah, they think that. Yeah, they think that
the world is closing down a little bit around them. Yeah.
And that there are some decisions being made that maintain the language as an interesting tool, but not as a growing community that's necessary to support a healthy hiring market.
Oh, interesting. So that's a comment.
It's sort of that's the read that I got off of it.
It comes back to that thing, doesn't it, where what belongs in the core versus what belongs in the user land. And I know Eric has always been a kind of somebody who has promoted the concept of doing things in userland. Now, obviously, the problem with userland is that it's more disparate. At the same time, it can be more innovative, and I think that's where the balance is. And I think that to some extent, I think the problem is that people there isn't another big coherent band of people outside of Cognitech that are kind of doing things together. I think that's going to be forming over the next year or so, where people now I hear that on the grapevine, by the way. People are talking to me about this, and you see like Maria Cloud and stuff like that. You see people organizing conferences in Europe. I've spoken to some people and they're trying to get cross channels going to make that whole thing a bit stronger. So there are moves afoot, I think, both at the sort of technical level and at the communication level outside of Cognitech to get better. And by the way, go on.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Oh yeah, like I'm very hopeful about like Clojurists Together. I think is doing really good work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say we see more podcasts this year. Honestly, we did the Deafin thing for a long time, and now we've got the REPL from Daniel Compton, which is really good, awesome thing.
Yeah.
We've got the guys who are doing the designing Clojure thing. We've got our friend Eric here doing a Clojure one with functional programming. There's quite a few coming out now. People are beginning to talk a bit more about this stuff, which is really good.
It is weird how we don't podcast as much. Maybe it's because we're all old, like the survey says. We have kids stuff. We don't have time to podcast like the youngins.
Get on your ham radio and start spreading the word.
Yeah.
maybe there's a whole bunch of Twitch streams that we're just not aware of.
Right, exactly. There's like a whole Instagram and what is that other one? Snapchat, like sub-universe, sub-community.
I'm too old for TikTok. I know it's
but Clojure is big on TikTok, apparently.
Maybe Clojure is big on TikTok, yeah.
Actually, I did look at Twitch. There's nothing there.
There's nothing. So, I hosted a Clojure conference last year, and I was talking to a friend who hosted a very similar Elixir conference. And it was in the same place, like we shared notes and everything. And we were talking, and he was like, well, how many Clojure conferences are there? Like 30? It's an old language. I was like, no. There's I don't know, 7, 8. And he was like, what? There's 15, 16 Elixir conferences already.
What?
And yeah. And it's to me, it's like they just started 2 years ago or something. But it's just something that they do. It's something that some communities seem to do, which is you start learning a language and there's no conference it's in your region, you just make one.
Okay.
And we don't do that, right?
Well,
Not
sorry
as
to be a
much as
bitch
we-
about it, but I think
No.
the leadership of the community is just not very communicative. It's just not a very out there going to conferences talking about stuff. It's it's an occasional keynote somewhere, which is all great stuff when it's done, but it's just there's not a spirit of engagement, I would say. With at that kind of level, where
you're right. You're right. Like Richie, like used to go to conferences. Like if you look at Clojure TV and you scroll all the way to the first video, it's like conference after conference, him going around spreading the word. And if you look at Elixir, like every conference, Jose Valim, the creator of Elixir, is there. He is speaking.
The question is, will he be there? Like, will he still be doing that in 5 years or 10 years?
That's a good question. Yeah. It's a good question, especially having to go to 30 conferences. Wouldn't be much.
Well, I think if you do like, if those guys were to do like 2 or 3 a year, it would be enough. I think David does 2 or 3 a year. David Nolan, he goes out to other conferences. I think Stuart did one as well, 1 or 2. So I don't think it's like it's not like there's 0, but it's pretty small. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes it's the culture, and the culture. The people at the top do have to take some responsibility for the culture, and whilst you can talk about politeness in the community being awesome and all that kind of stuff, and that's definitely true. It's a very positive community. On the other hand, it's not as communicative or as outgoing as maybe others are.
It's because we're all.
I also wonder. Yeah. I wonder if there's also something like to learn from, say the Ruby community, because they do a lot of conferences too. Because Ruby is an old language, and it didn't have much activity for a long time, and then it kind of blossomed. And I don't think it was so much. I mean, this I'm speaking from ignorance, but I have watched a lot of Ruby conference talks. It doesn't seem like it was like the core groups doing to like boom to make the conference circuit thing.
How closely does that blossoming track with the release and acceptance of Rails?
Yeah, exactly. So like if there's something like that happened in the Clojure community, like something that would make the killer app.
We're back to that.
Killer app, always back to that.
I mean, I guess.
But you can talk about killer apps, which is definitely true. But also, you've got killer people like DHH. I mean, you don't have to love him or hate him, but he's very engaged. He's very opinionated. He puts his words out there, and he stands behind what he says. And I don't always agree with what he says, but I admire him a lot. But for his ability to engage the community, I think that is really good. And I think that's inspirational to other people as well.
I mean, like Clojure's killer app is Clojure itself, I think, at this point. Like it's probably fair to say that it can't have a killer app if it's good at everything. Or not good at everything, but I feel like looking for the killer app is at this point not I don't know about not productive, but maybe there's a different question we should be asking.
But I think, I spoke recently to some people who are doing like live gaming and stuff like this. And, Mike makes a REPL, I'm making a REPL. I think Clojure's core feature to me is live programming. And that isn't exactly a killer app, but it is something which I think we underestimate and underplay a little bit. We're not doing it tonight, but we're doing it generally on this show. I think that's really something we should do more of as a community, personally.
Is just talk about the good stuff we have?
No, demonstrate it. Demonstrate the actual fact that things can be live and things can be changed in real time. You know, and get over this sort of this because that's one of the things that we often have with Clojure is not how do you sell the concept of what Clojure is? What is the you know, the spirit of Clojure and that kind of stuff? And it is this liveness, isn't it? If anything else, you know, there are other things
That's
clearly.
number one, yeah.
Oh yeah, liveness and immutability.
Yeah.
I know that immutability is a really good seller. Like, there's a reason that so many fintech companies use Clojure, because it's a lot of them. Fintech is very, very well represented in Clojure corporate land. And immutability is a huge selling point, because if there's one thing that all fintech companies understand, it's a ledger. It's the concept of this immutable, auditable record of changes. It's very, very powerful.
Now, what about the docs?
What's up, docs?
Oh my God. I mean, you know, error messages, right? Hygiene, you know, cleaned up the kitchen. What about the bathroom? You know, so, I mean, because, you know, that's an absolute disgrace. It really is. I'm just going to put it out there. Fight me on it.
The doc strings?
The overall state of Clojure documentation.
The overall state.
Doc strings is, yeah, they're pretty bad, but the actual, you know, you want to go to a website. If you, again, once you kind of know what you're doing, you end up going to the fucking source code. So, you know, but that's not a good answer for anyone, you know. Going reading the source code all day, it's, you know, it's going to slow you down. Documentation should be there to help get over, you know, like Zach Talman says, you know, get over the fundamental abstractions of the code, and then only when you need to go below that, if you do indeed need to go below that, then you can do that by looking at the code or the signatures or whatever. But we, you know, if I go up to the Clojure website, I have no idea how to navigate through it or how to find things on it. I do now because I know it quite well. You know, there's about 20 pages and I go to it all the time, so fine, shut up. But, you know, that's
I haven't actually thought of the docs in such a long time.
Yeah, you have to erase your mind. Yeah.
Well, when ask you a question then. Okay, what's interesting to me is, like, I always think about this with languages. Here we are, like 2019, yeah? There are certain features in language which you should be using by now, like CLJ deps, deps.eden. Are you using them?
Yes.
I am now.
Right, so
good.
And how did you get to it? You know, how did you get there?
My boss
I read the guide.
Yeah, the guide is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. The guide is very, very, very helpful. The onboarding documents just linked right to the deps.eden guide. I read through it. I set it up. It worked. I was surprised by how well documented it was, now that I think about it.
Yeah, so, you know, there are definitely some diamonds in the rough there. I mean, to me, that is really good, you know? But, you know, a lot of the stuff, protocols, multi-method, stuff like that, are very badly documented.
Tim Baldridge says tooling isn't there for deps.eden. I'm really excited to see what kind of tooling comes out for it, because I think it's really powerful. There's a lot that's going to be there, but it's true. It's not necessarily self-explanatory.
Well, what does he mean by tooling? Because to me, you know, you don't need much tooling. That's one of the nice things about it.
Something like a monorepo architecture. Like, there's nothing like line modules. Right, there's a lot of little line things for Lineagen that are nice that deps.eden doesn't have yet. But some of them are there specifically to deal with things that Lineagen doesn't do well that deps.eden already does. So
I must admit, I haven't used Lineagen for like 6 months now, and I'm missing nothing. So
I'm not really missing it right now, yeah. Once I figured out how to run the tests.
I'm not watching the chat, but can Tim say what he thinks it is? Because, you know, I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah, Tim, if you're on, what are some things that you want in deps.eden that aren't there that you think someone could be working on?
yeah, he's a smart bloke, so I'm definitely missing something.
Yeah,
you know, so.
yeah. I'd really, it would
Robert Johnson asked a question. Do any of the podcasters, that's us, think that one of the Clojure's superpowers is that the fact that it is a hosted language? I think it is one of the superpowers.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Why? Why is it a superpower? I mean, I get that it's interesting, but why is it a superpower? What does it?
That it can use the reach of Java, the JVM, and all the libraries available.
Yeah,
I think that's a superpower.
I think the
that's a
deployment
huge value add.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ray, you disagreed?
Well, yeah, I don't know. Maybe the reach is good. Yeah, the deployment part is good. Yeah.
I think it's like a necessary precondition, because I probably wouldn't be able to even use this language if it weren't for that. Like, how would I get stuff onto iOS apps without its support for JavaScript?
Exactly.
Unless I guess if it compiled to its own native thing, then I'd be like, oh, it'd be stuck in that little world that it is defining for itself. And if it didn't support Java, what would you do? I guess you would compile it and run it on the server by itself. That would be fine.
You'd do what other languages do, which is have like a C foreign function interface.
Yeah,
You'd use all the C libraries that are there.
Yeah. I mean, you know, in the future, maybe as you look at WebASM and stuff like that, you know.
But it is really, really nice to have access to all the Java stuff. Like, and it makes it a very appealing choice for places that are using Java that don't want to put their developers through that anymore.
I don't know. The reason I say it is because, you know, the reason I'm nervous about saying it's a superpower is because Java is already there and JavaScript is already there. So to me, the superpower isn't the deployment capability. It has to be something intrinsic to Clojure. That's why I don't think it's a superpower, because those things are already there. So that, you know, it's like saying, I don't know, it's a weird construct to me. You know, I don't know how I can get superpower from you know, another power, as it were. It's definitely a good thing.
Huh, that's really interesting. I'm being kicked out of this conference room.
Oh.
Being very politely kicked out of this conference room.
Are they like glaring at you?
I see a face appearing over the glass and then boots appearing under the glass. So I'm gonna go.
Okay.
All right. Good luck.
Yeah.
See you, Mia.
Bye. Be nice, everyone.
Whew, now she's gone. We can talk about her.
Yeah.
She's awesome.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, I see what you're saying, that it's not a superpower. It's almost like table stakes now. Like it doesn't set it apart from any other language. Like you could say the same about Scala or Groovy or, you know, the other JVM languages that they just get access to everything.
If you compare it to Lisps of the past, then it definitely makes a lot of sense, because suddenly you can deploy it everywhere. And like Mia says, you can reach into a lot of libraries underneath it. But, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe you could say that
in a modern world, yeah.
You can say that the foreign function interface is kind of nice and easy to use in Clojure.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, it's like it's readily available, and if you need to, you can.
Yeah. Right. And definitely being hosted does increase the deployment targets. But again, I don't see it as, it doesn't strike me as superpower, because it's not going to be a killer app. It's not going to be a killer feature for anything really. It's, you know, there has to be something intrinsic to itself, in my opinion,
for sure,
to qualify as a superpower. Sure. Maybe I'm being fussy there, but you know, that's my view.
No. I think you bring up a really good point that, like, I hadn't thought about that nuance. Like, of course it's a superpower, but no, everyone's got that power, so it's not super. It doesn't make it superior to anything. So what are the superpowers? I'd say dynamism. The fact that you can, work in a REPL and just work on a live system, modify it, and get really fast feedback. Like, I don't think any language does it as well as Clojure.
Yeah, I agree. That's my number one as well. Dynamism and immutability. And I think those are the two key things.
Yeah, the immutability was kind of unique to Clojure for quite a while, right? And I guess it's now elsewhere, but that was a superpower for a while.
I think I still feel a little bit like accessible default immutability is still pretty unique to Clojure.
Yeah, the fact that it defaults to that.
And the awesome standard library for using all the immutable data structures, like that's awesome too.
Yeah. I mean, my thinking is that it's the defaults that really matter, because there are libraries, there are languages that have options for immutability, and like Scala has, you can do immutable things in Scala, but it's not, and you could even say it's idiomatic, but I don't know what is idiomatic in Scala anymore, to be honest. Haskell has immutability, no doubt about it, but I don't consider that to be a very accessible language. Now, people might argue that Lisp is not accessible, but to me, Haskell is a lot more difficult to access than Clojure is.
And it doesn't have the hosting. So
it doesn't have the hosting.
You've lost all the reach. You can't be in the browser, and you can't, you could, compile binaries and stuff, but you're dealing with C libraries if you want to get existing libraries.
Did Java ever get immutable classes added to its standard library? Or do people still use that Google thing?
I don't know what you're talking about. I know they wanted to have value objects.
The Guava,
yeah. Thank you, Ray. Yeah. So I was excited because, it's at the time around 2005 or so. Somewhere around that time frame, Josh Block went to Google and he wrote the original collection classes, and Guava was already there, or maybe it was I don't remember the history, but I was like, maybe they'll add that to Java. And that was before I had started to use Clojure, of course, but I had already learned what immutability meant even back then. But that speaks to the fact that you have Guava available to you in Java, but it's not the default, right?
Exactly.
You're off in the corner coding that way, and all your other developer friends are not. And
for sure.
And it's the same with JavaScript, isn't it? They have immutable JS.
Yeah.
But you're kind of weird if you use it.
To use.
It's why are you doing this to yourself?
Yeah.
And you still don't have null punning, right? So someone returns an empty list, it's different from, you still got to check the null case all the time. I feel like there's all these little design decisions in Clojure that are, can that be a superpower? That it's well designed?
I think.
All right. Well, we've gone way off topic.
We've
gone way off.
And we've gone over now as well.
I want to read Daniel Compton's analysis because I always find it enlightening. And I just cannot imagine, this guy is very productive. He's running, what's it called? Clojure is Together. He's got a podcast. He's got a newsletter, and he does this where he reads 500 plus,
he's got a kid as well.
Comments. Yeah. And he's, anyway.
And he's got a job.
And he doesn't pull any punches. He calls it the way he sees it. So that's kind of nice.
And he's a main contributor on Reframe, and he's there.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's worth reading that. Yeah.
So I want to read this because I really think that I'm never going to get a chance to read 500 plus comments and organize it into something coherent.
Maybe it's what we should do for our next episode is just read it out.
Read it out loud. There you go.
One by one.
State of Clojure Survey 2019 analysis, February 6, 2019. Okay, I won't do it now. We don't need to do that live, right? That could be recorded.
Oh, good luck with that. Yeah.
Then we should transcribe it and compare it to the original. All right. I think we've lost all sense of thread. I don't think we're going to get to our other two topics that we had. We could push these off till next time. And we're probably not going to get to the REPL, are we?
Can I just say in closing, by the way, because I think I feel like I've had a lot of negativity on this episode, but I hopefully it's just been realism, but maybe it's been negative realism. But I'm still, I work with Clojure every day. I love Clojure. I'm still quite positive about its future, and so I'm a big fan still, and I enjoy working with it. And I do think it's a very powerful language, and it's got a lot of, I think it's got a great future. And I think the more we talk about it on shows like this, the more we show it off, the better. So, just to end on a slightly optimistic note from my side, anyway.
Yeah, I want to do that too, because I sometimes come off as negative. I work in Clojure all the time, and you remember the negative stuff more than the positive. And also since Mia was she was the most positive on the show, and she's gone now.
Really good. Yeah.
So
let's pick it up.
so yeah, for instance, if I'm trying to sell Clojure training and I can't find a company to buy it, I might be negative on Clojure for that day, right? But I'm able to support myself and my family selling Clojure training material, and that is really awesome. That means that there's enough people wanting to learn. Beginners, I talk to beginners, I talk to intermediate, I talk to advanced. People trying to switch careers, people first entering their careers. So it's growing. It's definitely growing. There's no doubt about that. I think that if people do have trouble finding jobs, it's mostly a problem of communication and finding each other more than them not existing. And so, that's an issue too, but it's not the issue that you think, which is oh, there's no jobs. No, there's plenty of jobs out there. So I'm very optimistic about the Clojure community.
What about you, Mike? Are you optimistic?
I am. Yeah. I wonder if I would even be programming now if it weren't for Clojure.
Yeah,
to be honest, I mean, maybe that's a negative way of looking at it, but it's truthful. Because I really enjoy this language.
Yeah. We had that conversation off air once, didn't we? After one of these shows.
I suspect I did. Yeah.
I think we all kind of agreed with that. That I wouldn't be a developer now if it wasn't for Clojure. That's for sure. Yeah.
Clojure is fun. It is a beacon of light in a sea of darkness.
Okay.
Right. I think we're done. Is this the end? Right. Did we finish? Did we get all the way to the end of the show?
We've run over.
We've run over, but we started late. All right. So if you like the show, please subscribe. YouTube has a little red button that you click and you will subscribe. And then after you click it, there's a little bell. You got to click the bell too, because if you click the bell, you will be notified when we go live. Your phone will buzz or whatever you have set up so that you don't miss it. Because that would be the worst, is if all your friends have seen it, they're talking about it.
Oh yeah.
And you have to go watch it late, when it's not live anymore. A recorded version, come on. You had a perfect question to put in the chat, and it's too late. So press that little bell. Also, we're on Twitter at apropos_cast, and we also tweet out there that we're going live. So do that too. Awesome. Any last words?
Hasta la vista.
Close parens.
Yeah.
Keep the balance.
Done. May all your parens be balanced.
Here.
Now I gotta find the window. It's done. The show's over, but I need a window with oh, there it is.
You can never stop it.
It says we're live still.
I know. I gotta find that button. I can't find it. Ah, here it is. Bye, guys. Everybody, y'all.